The motion has been agreed. As many?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I once again would like to thank God for this opportunity.
Sorry about that. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Marco City.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank Almighty God for this opportunity to once again lend my voice to yet another chapter in our national debate on matters that affect the lives of Bahamians. Madam Speaker, we are at a critical juncture in our country, which, Madam Speaker, is why it is so important for us to find collaborative ways to work together to deal with issues that are overarching, that are bigger than any one political organization. Unfortunately, Madam Speaker, the kind of mood being fostered by the Davis-led administration does not seek to include the opposition in substantive discussions on how to move this country forward. Madam Speaker, even as it relates to the legislation that we bring to this place, it is most unfortunate, and the member for St. Anne's, myself, and of course the member for East Grand Bahama, in particular in our interactions, find that we are often getting confirmation of what legislation is to be addressed, often too late. And it would be useful to follow a model that has been used by at least one minister, which is to ensure that we workshop some of these pieces of legislation for stakeholders to have an input. But, Madam Speaker, let me begin by addressing the issue raised by the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador, which is utterly false, Madam Speaker. The member seeks to make an excuse for the egregious act carried out by the member for Fort Charlotte, who in turn linked him very closely to the decision not to continue the hedge program, which we believe has resulted in a 163% increase in fuel charge. This House this morning was provided with information that is patently false. The reality is, I challenge members opposite to lay on the table any cabinet paper which was prepared for a June presentation of a hedge program to the Cabinet of the Bahamas. It was never intended to do so. In fact, it was in September that it was expected that the hedge program, the next round of it, would have been presented to Cabinet for an October execution. Misleading, Madam Speaker. The reality is, Madam Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Cat Island, Rumkey, San Salvador.
Stop the clock, please.
But is the member saying that a part of the hedge initiative was due for top-up or renewal in June of 2021? Is he denying that, one? Right? Is he denying that in June of 2021, a request was made to renew and or top up, and it was refused by their administration? If he's denying that, well, first I'll start off by answering whether it was due and whether it was denied. That's the question, right? And wherever you get, see, the same point of order, right? Because I stand on what I've said, unless he's able to produce some evidence to the contrary. You said you're rebutting what I said. If you're rebutting, produce what you're saying. Right? I don't have to produce a cabinet. I'm saying you answer, answer whether or not it was due.
You could not recover on this issue.
Recover?
Madam Speaker.
Recover from what?
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, a cabinet paper was prepared for September. This administration had an opportunity to execute it. Their failure to do so has resulted in a 163% increase in fuel charge. Madam Speaker, the very document that we have in front of us, Madam Speaker, goes a little further. It talks about a $150 million liability that this administration didn't even think it important enough to come to the public and explain the $150 million liability until now. So, Madam Speaker,
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Carolina Rum.
Well, I invite him to go to the page that speaks to the $150 million liability. He'll find, right? He's drinking the Kool-Aid of Neil Hartnell, right? Because if you go to the page that speaks to the $150 million contingent liability of government, what it speaks of the government undertaking to pay a legacy debt of an arrears for the fuel that was owed to the fuel supplier. That's what the $150 million deal with. And that's nothing to do with the hedge. Nothing to do with hedge. There's nothing to do with hedge. It has to do with a debt that was failed to be paid by the F&M. And perhaps I go as far as say maybe it's an accrued bill of over $100 million, right? Accrued bill. No. Be honest in what you're saying, because it's a debt that was due. Say what? I can't do what? You? Now don't listen. You? You want me to show you something?
I mean, whatever you wish. Tell me whatever you want. Whatever you want. No fair over here. Just like no fair over there, ain't none over here. So, Madam Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Carolina Rum, South.
Right. I've asked him to look at what he referred to the fiscal strategy report. It speaks about 150 million. Right? It's on page 59 of the report, and read what it says, right? And stop mischaracterizing it. It's an arrears of $150 million. It's a legacy debt that is owed by BPL, right? And we are paying $10 million a month to satisfy that. Has nothing to do with hedging. Has to do with the fuel supplied and not paid for.
$10 million a month for a bill? That was left?
Madam Speaker, I'm not going to relitigate an issue we raised in this House in terms of how that was accumulated. But what I would say is this, Madam Speaker. What I would say, Madam Speaker, is the failure of this administration. We already gave the explanation. We've done multiple press releases. About how this administration, in its failure to execute in September, its failure in February of the next year, accounted for much of the arrears that's reflected in here. But I don't want to go down that road. So, could you permit me to finish now? Can you permit me to finish now?
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Carolina Rum, Salvador.
Down this line of misleading the House. The debt, the $150 million debt that you see as mentioned in this, has nothing to do with any hedging. Full stop. It has nothing to do. Now, if you are clear, and I ask you to withdraw that, unless you could demonstrate it. Demonstrate how the hedge. But stop lying. If you don't know it, go back to your source. Go back to your source. Go to your source and get the information corrected. Yeah.
Thank you, honourable member.
So Madam Speaker, the member, Madam Speaker, if you're leaving, what he said on the record, I'd like to know, because what he said was unparliamentary in terms of saying that I'm lying. So, Madam Speaker, I wish that be expunged from the record. I wish for that to be expunged from the record.
I withdraw that, and I'll just say, he's saying He's saying a lot of false things in the House.
Thank you, Honorable Member.
Madam Speaker, the member for Kent Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador, in the course of talking about BPL, also made the point that was absolutely false, one of his many false things he said in the House, Madam Speaker, that there was no plan of action to address the legacy debt and bills that were owed, when he knows full well that the rate reduction bond did in fact find an audience in the international community that was very much interested in taking advantage of it. The member can make a different statement, as I've said in this House myself, which is I regret we did not pass the rate reduction bond while we were in office. But to say that a competent board did not have a holistic approach is incorrect. And so, Madam Speaker, the point is, members opposite have the very document that I have that clearly outline what the range of ideas were to move towards energy security in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And so to represent here that people were out of idea is patently false. What I do know is that the member for Fort Charlotte, in conjunction with the member for Kent Island, got sufficient documentation to show the effectiveness of the hedge program which was in place, a program that is similar to the one that is in place in Grand Bahama, and accrued benefit for them in much the same way it accrued benefit for us. Over $25 million for the period that it was in place. So for them and their consultants to now come and try to whitewash the history will not work. The public knows that your fuel bill is higher because they fail to execute the hedge. That's what the problem is.
The chair
No amount of
recognizes the
consultants
Honorable
can save
Member
them
for
from
Kent
that.
Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
Right? Wait a minute, Speaker, right? First of all, as I indicated in my communication, right, the hedge was not going to take effect until, June 2022, right? So the period so it would have had no impact or at all on the pricing of electricity to the consumer. The pricing to the consumer is directly related to the cost of fuel, which we have no control. Right? Now, if he wants to talk about BPL, the state they left BPL in, right? Let's talk about that. Right? And the rate reduction bond, Desmond Bannister, the former minister, explained what happened to the rate reduction bond, how the market was timid to deal with you. I spoke to him about it when they were attempting to amend the legislation here. And I asked him whether he went to the market first before he come in here. The problem is that no one was listening. Nobody listened. And so the rate reduction bond went nowhere. They had 4 years. They had 4 years to get it right. Did they?
Thank you, Honorable Member.
What is interesting is how he reveals the secrets. I wanted you to keep talking. I wanted to know what else you heard. But, Madam Speaker, I close on this particular subject only by repeating the member for Fort Charlotte, in conjunction with the Prime Minister, are responsible for the 163% increase in fuel charge, which resulted in a 35% increase on your electricity bill that you are experiencing right now if you're a vulnerable Bahamian. The middle class and small businesses will experience a close to 100% increase on your electricity bill, in large measure because of the decision that they made. And even though they were briefed, refused to act on the information. That is the reality, Madam Speaker.
Falsehood.
It's a falsehood.
Right, Bahamians understand. One thing is they don't. Bahamians understand that what the cost of fuel is and has been, right? They understand that, right? And he's talking about this 163%. The words could say anything, right? How does he arrive at it? Where he got that? Where the evidence is? You keep talking about this 163%, right? But I mean. I know. Look here.
Lord have mercy.
Lord have mercy upon me. Because I see now
One set
what
of
you got
lies after the next.
But I see Kalani sit next to him. And I realized what's happening. I see.
Madam Speaker, today we are discussing the fiscal strategy report. Madam Speaker, as I begin these remarks, let me say up front that last time we demanded that the report be laid, the Davis-led administration made the determination that they were not prepared to comply with the law and refused to bring the fiscal strategy report here. In fact, they said they wouldn't waste the people's time. A direct quote from a public servant on that subject. Madam Speaker, they released it online. They released it online. They released it online. We never came here to debate it. This year, after being accused of being late, they finally came here to release the report. And Madam Speaker, what is interesting about it is that it resembles in some ways, not all, the report that they released previously. And what do we know about this administration? The Prime Minister accused us of impacting negatively the reputation of the Bahamas in terms of how we characterize the last fiscal strategy report. But I want to submit that it is this administration that continues to adversely affect our reputation relative to financial matters because of their refusal to follow even the reports that they have put in place. Madam Speaker, we all know that this is a guideline. A fiscal strategy report is a guideline. It sets out some parameters within which the government must operate as it relates to how they deal with the issue of our deficit and our expenditure. We are clear on that. But certainly, the law requires that if they are going to vary what they project they intend to do to grow the economy, to handle expenses, etc., that they ought to come with a compelling reason why they are varying their actions from the fiscal strategy report to the time when they introduce the budget. What I find worrisome is the Prime Minister is talking about laying in the future both documents simultaneously. Unless that's going to happen well in advance, the question is, how would the budget exercise benefit from feedback from all of us if they release it at the same time? And given their track record, I would think they would release it just before you have to debate, because that's how they operate, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, let me say this: the Prime Minister, during the price control debacle fostered by them because of their refusal to consult with the private sector, the Prime Minister admonished the public to follow the law. It's a favorite chorus of the Prime Minister. Secondly, when he was dealing with another group of stakeholders, once again, the Prime Minister and his colleagues, whether it's the pharmacists, everybody's compelled, follow the law. Just recently, while talking to insurers, the Prime Minister indicated that a part of why the government is doing what it's doing is because they fully expect that persons would be compliant with the law. And Madam Speaker, we agree, persons should be compliant with the law. But isn't it amazing that the very Prime Minister who's advocating for all and sundry to be compliant with the law has consistently led his team in violating the law not once, not twice, not three times, over and over again. One, Madam Speaker, is the failure to comply with the Procurement Act, failure to release the details relative to the slew of contracts for hundreds of millions of dollars to persons who we don't know who they are. Violation of the law. Madam Speaker, you don't get to decide that you will amend the law and later on you will then comply, but you're not going to comply today because you have intentions to change it. But Madam Speaker, that's what the member for Kent Island, Wamkin, San Salvador and his team have done. They have held different people at different standard, but there's a different standard for the Progressive Liberal Party. The Procurement Act is one example. Their consistent lateness on providing a variety of financial reports. Again, the excuse is these were cumbersome pieces of legislation. They do not facilitate timely compliance, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the reality is, when these were being passed, they were here, and they were woke at the time they were here. They voted for all of these pieces of legislation. The member for Kent Island, Rum Kingston, Salvador, the member for Exuma, the member for Angliston, the member for, and they voted for them. So one does not vote then and then now, now come and say that we are not complying with it because there were complications. They've represented, when we talk about truthfulness, it's been represented that they were not peer reviewed. When they were reviewed locally and they were peer reviewed regionally, internationally, with the help of multinational organizations as well, Madam Speaker. And so, Madam Speaker, let me say that when the government wishes to hold people to a certain standard, they themselves must hold themselves to the same standard. There is one law, one rule for the New Day government and a different rule for the rest of us. And true to form, the moment you start challenging, this is a government that cannot take challenges. Immediately they talk about threats, they respond with threats on what they can or will or hope to do. Consistently, Madam Speaker, consistently. So, Madam Speaker, the very fiscal strategy report was due in November. And unfortunately, Madam Speaker, true to form, the government is now coming in February to lay the report. Consistently late on important pieces of legislation. Madam Speaker, as mentioned earlier, the purpose of this act is in part to bind the government to ensuring that budgets deal with particular deficits, and the government should outline how it intends to address the issue of the deficit, how it intends to meet its expenditure targets. And so I can predict right now, Madam Speaker, that come budget time, this administration would have moved away from aspects of this as they did the last time. Remember last time, Madam Speaker? They said they were going to deal with the issue of state-owned enterprises and the overwhelming subventions that were given. Instead of the government addressing state-owned enterprises, making them more efficient, determining to what extent they are rolling back some of the capital expenditure there, what they did is they doubled down on extreme hiring, extreme bloating of many of the corporations. Here's a government that is talking about the challenges that we face financially, but there's no real discussion about them constraining the excesses that they have given birth to. I believe one of the figures I heard recently, and I know the member who I have tremendous respect for, the member for Southern Shores who's here, I understand when we left one of the corporations, I think they had roughly around 161 employees. Today, I understand that particular corporation may have closer to 275 persons. We already know at that time it had more staff than...
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Southern Shores.
It's amazing that when we speak in this honorable house, we speak things that we hear and not facts. I just want to let the member of Marco City know that that is false, okay? When I came to BAIC, they were short. They did a staff audit. And based on recommendation from my HR, I was advised that we need a particular set of employees in order to complement the corporation. At that particular time, the corporation was losing funds. Every single week, we had break-ins during the corporation. The corporation have 2 properties, one in Soldier Road and one in Old Trail. And every time we have complaint from various tenants how the corporation was abandoned. So in order for us to secure our tenants, I was instructed by my superiors, I was instructed by my HR that we need more securities. That we did, and as of this day, BAIC has yet to get any break-in by any persons, or our tenants could truly saying that they are safe in our parks. And so with you saying that, sir, with you saying that, no. As a matter of fact, this is the second time you mentioned this in this honorable house. And so, So, this is the second time you mentioned this in this honorable house.
Members,
Of course, a staff increase. By recommendation. By recommendation. But what you're saying is false. So just get it right. Get it right. Just get it right. You should have it. But you should have it. You should have it. And it's false.
Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, this administration continues to swell various state-owned enterprises, inclusive of the one that I just mentioned. And Madam Speaker, we want our people to be employed, but what we want is the right fit of skill set with the vacancies that exist to meet particular needs. And so, Madam Speaker, do not put in your report your intention to deal with state-owned enterprises and then refuse to do so. Madam Speaker, let me also say, Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, let me also say that this administration has brought back a slew of senior public servants after having changed the policy to, one, pay them the pension and at the same time pay them a new salary. This is an administration that, rather than address many of the critical issues that we face as a country, are spending scarce resources, continuing to take, in many instances, Madam Speaker, unnecessarily large delegations traveling around the world, while there is a need for us to take our scarce resources to address issues at Princess Margaret, at the RAN, to address issues in opening the clinics in the Family Island, to address a series of critical issues that continue to affect our people. Madam Speaker, the member for Fox Hill continues to make a lot of interesting points. None of those points include the large number of foreign officers that have been deployed internationally. We do have, and I believe it's important that we have a presence around the world in very specific areas. However, this member has gone to great lengths to ensure that in almost every jurisdiction and almost every theme, we have an ambassador and additional foreign officers. So, Madam Speaker, this is an administration that feels as if it could spend the Bahamian people money without giving a thorough explanation behind the rationale. We talk about falsehood. Falsehood is when you take a trip to Bermuda, spending the public's money, and feel that you don't have an obligation to explain how you are able to take money out of the Treasury for a private political trip. And while everybody else is penalized for any mis or malfeasance, there is no consequence for the Davis administration when they violate the law, Madam Speaker. There is one law for the Progressive Liberal Party, and there's a law for everybody else. Think about this, Madam Speaker. This is the same administration, in my view, who only talk about matters and partially confess when they are discovered. We only discovered that this administration had permission to draw down on $232 million of the special drawing rights from the central bank after it showed up in one of the central bank's report. This administration didn't mention it in the debt management report they released in advance. They didn't mention it. They didn't forecast it in the budget that they had just come out of or had come out months earlier. But we discover that they drew down, some say advance, others say borrow money from the central bank. Madam Speaker, they were aware that something was inappropriate to begin to draw down on these resources, because they then came up with a memorandum of understanding to go back and amend the law retroactively to make legal what they had already done, Madam Speaker. Had this been the Free National Movement, they would still be talking about that today. But that's what this administration did. The same administration that positions itself as if they are the paragon of virtue. I've given a series of examples of how they violate the law. One rule for them, and one rule for others. But there is no penalty. Who is penalized? Who is penalized for the violation of the Central Bank Act? Madam Speaker, today, no one has thought it even necessary to lay the memorandum of understanding on the table in the House of Assembly. They have moved on as if there is no moment in it. And we will not forget, and we will not let the public forget what they have done relative to BPL, what they have done with respect to the Procurement Act, what they have done with the special drawing rights with respect to Central Bank. We will not let the public forget what they have done with respect to Bermuda. This is a pattern of behavior, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, you see, there's no remorse in terms of when these decisions are made, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Davis-led administration has to focus on good governance, Madam Speaker. When they refuse to follow the law, it is not us who damage the public, the Bahamas' reputation. It is them that damages the reputation of the country. Because credit agencies locally and internationally are watching and listening. When they refuse to follow the law, or they put something in the fiscal strategy report and substantially move away from that report, rating agencies are watching and listening. Bilateral organizations that wish to do business with us are watching. So, Madam Speaker, it is important that the government follow the law, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in this fiscal strategy report, the government projects revenue generation that we would love for them to explain in the wrap-up, because we haven't heard it so far. We simply believe that these figures are not only overly optimistic, the figures are most unlikely to be achieved. I believe they're projecting anywhere from $1.1 to $1.4 billion that they hope to achieve. We simply do not see the pathway. When we look in the fiscal strategy report, we don't see the pathway to get there. Remember, Madam Speaker, they did this before in the last year. So this is an administration that is good at selling dreams, with a hope that there would be some windfall that occur miraculously to confirm what they have projected. But, Madam Speaker, these reports ought to show what is the plan of action that will get them to the finish line. And so, Madam Speaker, no, we don't see how they're going to get to 1.1 or 1.4 billion dollars, given the fact that there is no restraint in how they spend. No restraint. Madam Speaker, the 50th anniversary is a special occasion in our life, but watch how they could bust up the money, Madam Speaker. Watch how they could bust this money up while people are struggling to find food, while people are struggling to find accommodations, while they are reaching out for rent assistance, and the minister doesn't have sufficient money in his budget, or there isn't the timely release of the tranches to help them. Give social services more money. The promise was to increase the social safety net, but it ain't happening. It ain't happening in that way. So, Madam Speaker, it is of great concern that the government speaks truthfully in these reports so that the public is able to believe what is being represented, and our credibility would not be on the line. Madam Speaker, there's a table that the government used when it looked sector by sector at each sector's contribution to GDP. Madam Speaker, we'd like in the wrap-up for the member for Kent Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador to explain how multiple sectors' contribution to GDP in those tables appear to exceed the contribution of tourism. Now, Madam Speaker, I'm not an accountant, so there may be a logical reason why, but we certainly do not understand how transformation, how financial services and each of those subsectors are going to exceed tourism in terms of its contribution to GDP. So that raised, Madam Speaker, certainly it raised my eyebrow, and we would like for the government to clearly indicate how is it that other sectors that we know contribute less than 30% to GDP in the sectoral breakdown appears, Madam Speaker, to say something else. Madam Speaker, the other thing that concerns me as I look at the fiscal strategy report is that the ability to get to the finish line in terms of $1.1 or $1.4 billion relies on a number of reforms. This administration is slow on a number of those important reforms. And in order to have the success that they are projecting, many of these reforms are prerequisites. So, for example, Madam Speaker, we're not moving forward in terms of ease of doing business. Some of the recent decisions by this administration is moving us backwards. It's slowing down small businesses' ability to access their license, as simple as their license. And Madam Speaker, in terms of empowering small businesses, we're still looking for the $50 million that this administration mentioned has been embedded in the budget. Madam Speaker, there is an issue with how this government is treating with a menu of options on how we can improve the ease of doing business. Local investors and international investors, if we do not create the one-stop shop, if we do not create an environment where we can move quickly, if we do not ensure that the digitization program, which Minister Thompson worked diligently on prior to demitting office, if we don't move these things ahead, Madam Speaker, much of the growth initiatives being recommended in this report will not see the light of day. Madam Speaker, there are numerous reforms that we are concerned that this administration is not on target in terms of reaching. And so, Madam Speaker, this is an administration that forecasted in the last fiscal strategy report there'll be no new taxes. But fees keep popping up all over the place. Madam Speaker, let me digress for a second just to say that I can almost assure you that 9 out of 10 ministers the last time the report was released didn't even read it in advance before it got here, because many were surprised when it was released online. Madam, you were traveling, and the member for Fort Charlotte computer, his laptop wasn't working. That's why you all didn't see it. So I can give you a bly on that. So, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the reality is, Madam Speaker, that this administration, if it is going to succeed, have to take this albatross they put on the back of the Bahamian people off. You can't say there are no new taxes, and fees are popping up in the Ministry of Transport. Fees are popping up in inland revenue. Madam Speaker, there are a series of things this administration is doing that's making it increasingly difficult for small businesses to develop. And so, Madam Speaker, as I close, I close on this note, Madam Speaker, that here is an administration. Here's an administration, Madam Speaker, short on reforms, refused to introduce the Freedom of Information Act in its entirety, Madam Speaker, when people can begin accessing information right now. Here is an administration, Madam Speaker, when they tout the growth in GDP, refuse to say that some of it is on the backs of people because of inflationary pressures, Madam Speaker. Here is an administration, Madam Speaker, who is meticulously going after Free National Movement supporters in the manner in which they are launching investigations, while there are members of the Progressive Liberal Party, Madam Speaker, who are already charged that they are seeking to nolly those cases, Madam Speaker. Here is an administration.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Cat Island, Ramkey, and Salvador.
What investigations we here conducting, the government conducting? What investigation are you talking about?
Yeah, what? Name one.
Right? What right?
When you two, I'll be happy to
Yeah.
speak to them, my brother.
I know about one completed investigations.
But that was the government.
That was the government. See, we're not you, you know. The police does their work. Right? The police does their work.
Madam
Thank you, honourable member.
Madam Speaker, let me say this. I watch carefully, Madam Speaker, appointments that are being made, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, whenever the executive of government begins to become almost indistinguishable from various arms of government, we have a problem. And Madam Speaker, in my view, we are traveling down a very dangerous road in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And so, Madam Speaker, I speak through you to the Bahamian people that we are going to remain vigilant to watch the interaction and the relationship between the executive and various regulatory bodies, uniform branches, and all other areas of government to make sure that no Bahamian rights are trampled upon. Because, Madam Speaker, there appears to be one rule for the Progressive Liberal Party and a different rule for the rest of us.
You guys had a parade in 2017.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many? The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Foxhill.
I'm afraid that punting on the response to the Prime Minister doesn't quite answer the issue. On the question of you're making a specific allegation that the PLP is targeting F&M supporters and investigating them. That doesn't answer that allegation. If you have the evidence of that, let's see it. But as far as I know, we're not engaged in that at all. Never. So that's the issue. I think, and all you did was punt it to another subject. You didn't say, okay, I withdraw it. It's not so.
I did not withdraw.
Right, so that's the point. That's what we're trying to get to the bottom of. Where's the allegation? Where is the evidence of it? Where? Where? No, that's a serious allegation to make. What we know is there are, in the case law, in the transcript of cases, specific allegations about ministers of the F&M government that were engaged in cases that were brought before the courts. We know that, so that's on the record.
They were condemned.
Right, by the judges. By the judges. There's no such thing that exists on this side with that. So you have said on the record that we are politically targeting using the police, I assume, or the courts.
Why assume? I mean, why did you go straight to the police?
So, I have no idea. You made the statement. No, you made the statement. And I'm just saying that.
I stand by the statement.
No, okay, that's fine. Then we need to ask the speaker to strike it from the record because it is false, it is untrue, and it's irresponsible for you to be saying it.
Let me answer. Madam Speaker, the member mentioned the police, right? I want to litigate this very carefully for you. Let me say this. There are multiple ministries where employees who are believed to be members of the Free National Movement, just this weekend, we sought to find attorneys to go to the police headquarters to provide representation for families who are aggrieved because they have relatives who work with other folks, supposedly of other political persuasions, who are picked up, are put in custody, only to be told by some of the folks that, listen, this is an order that came from. You want me to answer you, or you don't want me to answer you? Would you like me to answer you, or you don't want me to answer you? Because we could play cute, but there are too many people who are being picked up, driven around.
The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Foxhill.
Carry it even farther than you went before.
You asked for an explanation.
I asked you to say.
Members.
I asked you to say where is the evidence that we, not the police.
Not what
I
someone
can't
said.
speak for the police. Or some third party said, no, I'm asking where is it? You made an allegation about us. You made an allegation about us. You made
a member on the floor.
about us. Us, these people here. Not the police. Not the, no. I don't want you to continue.
Members,
I'm just
one member,
saying to you,
one member.
You made an allegation about us, which is false. False in every material particular. Thank you. Every material particular. And I'm asking you, if you have evidence that we did any such thing, produce it now or withdraw it. That's what I'm saying. Otherwise, the Speaker should expunge it from the record. And you should forever hold your peace on this subject.
You can never silence me, not you. So what
I'm not silencing you.
Members,
on this
members.
subject, I'm saying on this matter, you cannot make a false allegation against these people sitting in here. That's the point I'm making. If you have the evidence, bring it. Otherwise, withdraw it or forever hold your peace. Then it should be expunged from the record. And I so ask the Speaker to do so. It's awful getting up here making these bold assertions that are completely and utterly false.
There's a member on the floor.
Completely and utterly
There's a
false.
member on the floor. Thank you, Honourable Member. The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for St. Anne's.
Since the member for Fox Hill is so concerned about where the evidence is, I suggest that he call for the appointment of a select committee so that we can carry out an investigation into this evidence, Madam Speaker. And when the member for Fox Hill stands up here, Madam Speaker, I don't know if he's speaking on behalf of his constituency or if he's speaking on behalf in his role as chairman of the Progressive Liberal Party. He needs to separate his hats when he's in this house and tone down the rhetoric, Madam Speaker, or forever hold his peace, Madam Speaker, or forever hold his peace. You can't come in here with several hats and expect the people to take you seriously. There's a rule book. You can follow the rule book. If you want to find evidence, go to the rule book, appoint a select committee. Let's get to the bottom of it. It's in the interest of the behaving people.
Honourable members,
Or
honourable
forever.
members. Honourable
Or forever,
members.
Madam Speaker.
Honourable
Hold your
members.
peace.
What is this all this shouting
Appoint a
about?
select committee.
Lord of mercy.
Appoint a select committee, Madam Speaker.
Honourable member.
Appoint a select committee. Or forever hold your peace, Madam Speaker.
Honourable member.
You recognize anybody else yet? I'm still
Honourable member. Honourable member.
You recognize somebody else now? Am I still on the floor? Is my question, Madam Speaker.
No, tone down.
Thank you, Madam
Calling
Speaker.
You're calling the chair you.
I'll hold my
Don't do
peace.
that.
I'll hold my peace, Madam Speaker.
Calm down.
Thank you.
Honourable members, let me say something here. I sit in this honourable place and I hear. But let me say this, and I say this in representation of the good men and women on the Royal Bahamas Police Force, where I spent 30 years of my life. And when these things, we have to remember now, as we sit in this place and we pass these laws and these accusations, we have to remember there's life outside of these halls. And those men and women are honorable men and women who show up every day to serve this country. And I sit in this chair, and I will not allow members to come on, I don't care which side, and make those men and women look like they cooperate with any government illegally against people in this society. And I am on the floor now, Honourable Member, and I am speaking. And I will have that expunged from the records of this place. And I hope to never hear any member on any side unless they bring some hardened facts to this floor. Do that to the honourable members of the Royal Bahamas Police Force.
Madam Speaker, it was not done. What I said did not do what...
Remember, I have not recognized anybody in this place. The chair recognizes the honourable member for Marco City.
Members opposite talked about members of the former administration, ministers, who were judicially condemned. Madam Speaker, they talked about the interaction of those ministers with police officers and others. That is what the assertion was. It is not possible. It is not possible.
And I'm talking about what is on the floor today.
Madam,
I'm not talking about what happened there
no,
when I wasn't present.
No, Madam Speaker.
When I wasn't present.
No.
When I wasn't present.
They just did it. They just did it. Madam Speaker, may I complete the statement? So my point is, Madam Speaker,
And didn't I say on all sides?
well, yeah, but I want to be clear so that one does
so
not
let us be
so that
clear.
the public
I
does not
didn't
get the
stutter.
impression that
I made a
am
clear
berating
statement.
the police force. I support the police force. But what I do not support is somebody in authority who believe they have the ability to call someone, to draw attention to someone without even reducing it to writing. Without reducing it to writing, and persons are picked up. Can I finish the segment? Because I'm in here to represent Bahamians out there who are aggrieved as well. And so
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Fox Hill.
Sublime to the ridiculous. You then have made a set of allegations, which we have asked, Madam Speaker, to be expunged from the record.
Also expunged.
There is nothing to support the allegation that was made against these members sitting in here of directing any political persecution or prosecution against any person. Insofar as he's quoting what I said, I simply said that my recollection was that there is on the record of the courts allegations and findings against ministers of their administration in connection with cases brought against members of the former administration. That's what I said. I went no further than that. No further than that. All I ask at this point is that this matter be concluded by either he withdraws what the allegation against us or it's expunged from the record. That's all I ask.
Thank you, honourable member. As